Have you ever wondered if God truly hears the words you speak in your darkest moment? Can a single phrase, whispered in desperation, actually change the state of your soul? And is it possible that one sincere apology to heaven carries more weight than 1,000 perfect prayers? Throughout history, the Church has taught about the power of contrition, the deep sorrow for sin that moves the heart toward God. But few people in any century have been given the gift to see what actually happens in the invisible world when someone speaks those words with real sincerity. St. Teresa of Ávila was one of those rare souls, the Carmelite nun from 16th century Spain who reformed an entire religious order, wrote books that changed Catholic spirituality forever, and saw visions that terrified and consoled her in equal measure. Among the thousands of pages she wrote under obedience to her confessors, there exists a passage that has haunted readers for over 400 years. It appears in her interior castle, written in 1577 at the convent of St. Joseph in Ávila during the final decade of her life. She describes what she saw happen to a soul at the exact moment it turned toward God with genuine sorrow, not theatrical sorrow, not social sorrow, not the kind of apology you offer because someone is watching, but the kind that breaks you open from the inside, the kind that admits the truth without decoration. Teresa writes that she saw a light enter the soul, not metaphorical light, not the warm feeling people talk about when they mean comfort. She saw actual radiance, brilliant and sudden, flooding into the center of a person's being the instant they spoke words of true contrition. The light moved faster than anything earthly. It did not wait for long prayers or elaborate rituals. It came at the first genuine turn of the heart. If you value documented mystical history and the recorded experiences of the saints like this, subscribe. It is the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you are hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the complete critical edition of Teresa's works, published by the Instituto de Historia Teresiana in Rome between 1967 and 2000, and the annotated translations by Kieran Cavanaugh and Otilio Rodriguez for the Institute of Carmelite Studies, which include manuscript comparisons from the El Escorial Codex dating to 1588 and historical context verified. Against 16th century Inquisition records held in the Archivo Histórico Nacional in Madrid. Now back to the information. The vision came during a period of intense prayer in the spring of 1577. Teresa had been struggling with illness, as she often did. Chronic pain had become her constant companion. She was 52 years old, exhausted from years of founding convents across Spain, fighting resistance from both religious and civil authorities, and writing treatises that she feared might be burned by the Inquisition. Her health had deteriorated badly that winter. She suffered from what historians believe was a combination of malaria, which she had contracted years earlier during travels through southern Spain, and heart problems that made breathing difficult. In letters to her brother Lorenzo, written in February of that year, she mentions being unable to walk more than a few steps without stopping to rest. But in that particular week in late April, she had been granted a spiritual consolation. She describes it in chapter 29 of the Interior Castle. She was praying in her cell at the convent of St. Joseph, the small reformed house she had founded in 1562 after years of conflict with the Carmelite leadership. The cell measured roughly 10 feet by 8 feet, with a narrow window facing north toward the city walls. She was alone. The other nuns were at work in the garden or the kitchen. It was early afternoon, probably around 2 o'clock. Based on her mention of the bell for none, the traditional prayer hour, she became aware of a presence beside her, not a physical presence. She makes this distinction carefully because the Inquisition was watching everything she wrote. She says it was an intellectual vision, meaning she perceived it with absolute certainty in her soul, though her physical eyes saw nothing. In that state, she was shown the interior of a human soul. She describes it as a castle made of a single diamond or very clear crystal. The castle had many rooms, she explains, 7 main dwelling places arranged in concentric circles with countless smaller chambers branching off from each. Some were bright and some were dark, depending on the state of grace or sin in which the soul lived. At the very center was the brightest room of all, where God himself dwelt. But between the outer rooms and that center, there were walls and shadows and locked doors. Sin had built them. Habit had reinforced them. Pride had decorated them until they looked like permanent architecture. Then Teresa saw something that changed her understanding of mercy forever. She watched as a soul in one of the outer rooms, far from the light, suddenly turned. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no thunder or vision or angelic choir. The soul simply stopped running and said the words, "I'm sorry, Lord." That was all. 3 words in Spanish. "Pardon, Señor." But they were spoken with complete honesty. No excuses, no bargaining, no mental reservation. Just the plain truth spoken into the silence. The instant those words left the soul, Teresa saw light explode through the castle. Not slowly, not gradually. She uses the word immediately twice in the same paragraph to emphasize the speed. The light came from the center, from the room where God lived, and it rushed through every corridor. In chamber like water breaking through a dam, walls did not stop it. Locked doors meant nothing. The light went everywhere the soul existed, flooding darkness, dissolving shadows, burning away the cold that sin had left behind. Teresa was so shaken by what she saw that she stopped praying and sat in silence for nearly an hour. When her sisters found her later, her face was wet with tears. She told her confessor, Father Geronimo Gracian, that she had seen the mercy of God in action, and it was more powerful than she had ever imagined. Gracian recorded the conversation in his own memoirs, published posthumously in 1611 under the title Dialogues on the Life of the Blessed Virgin, Mary Teresa of Jesus. He wrote that Teresa repeated the same phrase 3 times. One word, Geronimo. One sincere word, and the soul is flooded. But Teresa did not stop with the vision. She spent the next several months trying to understand what she had seen and how to explain it to others. She consulted with theologians at the University of Salamanca, particularly with Father Domingo Banes, her longtime confessor and a professor of theology, who would later defend her writings before the Inquisition. Banes was initially skeptical of mystical visions, as any good Dominican should be. He questioned Teresa closely about every detail. What exactly did she see? How did she know it was from God and not from her own imagination, or worse, from the enemy? Teresa answered with the precision that made her writings valuable to the Church. She explained that the vision carried with it a certainty that natural knowledge cannot produce, a clarity that left no room for doubt, and an effect that lasted long after the experience ended. She told Banes that weeks after seeing the light enter the soul, she still felt the weight of that truth pressing on her heart, changing how she prayed, how she heard confessions, how she spoke to people about their sins and their hope. Banes was convinced. He wrote in his own notes, dated November 1577 and preserved in the Dominican archives in Salamanca, that Teresa's vision was consistent with the theology of grace taught by St. Thomas Aquinas and confirmed by the Council of Trent. He noted particularly that Teresa had seen justification happening not as a process stretched over time, but as an instantaneous event triggered by the free act of contrition. She writes in The Interior Castle that most people misunderstand contrition. They think it requires long preparation, perfect self-knowledge, or a spotless past. But what she saw proved otherwise. The soul in her vision had not been living in perfection. It had been far from God, wandering in what she calls the outer courtyard of the castle, distracted by created things, trapped in patterns of selfishness and fear. Yet the moment it turned with honesty, the transformation was instant. Teresa explains it this way: God does not measure contrition by the words we use, or the time we spend, or the tears we shed. He measures it by one thing only: sincerity. The Latin word is sinceritas, which means without wax, a reference to ancient sculptors who would hide cracks in marble statues by filling them with wax and painting over them. A sincere statue was one with no hidden flaws, no cover-up, no pretense. Sincere contrition meant the same thing: no hiding, no excuses, just the raw admission of truth. She tells the story of a woman who came to her at the Convent of the Incarnation in Ávila sometime in the early 1560s. The exact date is not recorded, but Teresa mentions it was during the years before her reform began, when she was still struggling with lukewarm devotion herself. The Incarnation was a large house, home to over 100 nuns, many of whom came from noble families and lived with considerable comfort. Teresa spent nearly 30 years there before founding her reformed convents. The woman had lived a hard life. She had been involved in relationships outside marriage, had lied to protect herself, had stolen small amounts of money when she was desperate, and had stopped going to confession because she felt too ashamed to speak the truth out loud. She told Teresa that she had tried to pray many times, but always gave up because her sins felt too heavy, and God felt too far away. Teresa listened. Then she asked the woman one question: "Do you wish you had not done those things?" The woman started to answer with explanations, with reasons, with the story of why each sin had seemed necessary at the time. Teresa stopped her. She asked again, slowly, "Do you wish you had not done them?" The woman went silent. Then she whispered, "Yes." Teresa said, "Then tell him that. Just that. Nothing else." The woman looked confused. She asked if she should go to confession first, if she should prepare a list, if she should do penance before approaching God. Teresa shook her head. She said, "Go to the chapel right now. Kneel down. And say to Jesus, 'I'm sorry. Mean it. Then come back and tell me what happened.'" The woman did as Teresa instructed. She went to the small chapel at the Incarnation, the one with the wooden crucifix that Teresa herself often prayed before, knelt in front of the tabernacle, and spoke the words. When she returned to Teresa an hour later, her face had changed. She told Teresa that the moment she said the words and meant them, she felt something break inside her. Not painful, just a sudden release, like a knot coming undone. She said it felt as though a door had opened and light had poured in. Teresa smiled. She told the woman that what she had felt was not imagination. It was the actual mercy of God entering her soul the instant she turned toward him with sincerity. Years later, after that encounter and hundreds like it, Teresa would write in the interior castle that God is always waiting at the center of the soul. He never leaves, he never withdraws. But sin creates barriers between the outer rooms where we live and the center where he dwells. Those barriers are not physical. They are made of pride, fear, self-deception, and the refusal to admit the truth. The moment we stop pretending and speak honestly, the barriers dissolve, not because we earned it, not because we did enough penance, but because honesty is the only key that opens the door to grace. She also saw the opposite. Teresa records in her autobiography, written in 1565 at the command of her confessor father, Garcia de Toledo, that she was shown souls who spoke words of contrition but did not mean them. These souls remained in darkness. The words left their mouths, but nothing changed inside. Teresa describes it as watching someone knock on a door without actually wanting it to open. The knocking was for show. It was to satisfy someone else. It was to avoid punishment or gain approval. But the heart remained closed. And when the heart is closed, grace cannot enter. Not because God withholds it, but because there is no opening through which it can flow. One case Teresa mentions involved a man she knew in Toledo. She does not name him, but scholars believe it may have been a nobleman connected to the Inquisition, who confessed his sins regularly but continued in the same patterns without real conversion. Toledo was the ecclesiastical capital of Spain, seat of the archbishop who held enormous power over religious life. Teresa spent considerable time there between 1562 and 1577, often dealing with Inquisition officials who questioned her teachings. The man she describes had access to the best spiritual directors in Spain. He went to confession weekly at the Cathedral of Toledo, a massive Gothic structure that dominated the city skyline. He received the sacraments, he performed acts of charity visible to everyone, but Teresa saw in prayer that his confessions were a ritual, not a transformation. He said the words because it was expected. He received absolution because the sacrament is valid regardless of the minister's perception. But his soul remained dim because his sorrow was not sincere. Teresa writes that she prayed for him daily for over 2 years, begging God to give him the grace of true contrition. Then, in 1574, she learned that the man had fallen gravely ill with what doctors described as a burning fever, probably typhus, which was epidemic in Toledo that summer. On his deathbed, finally stripped of all pretense, he broke. He wept. He admitted the truth. He stopped performing. And Teresa, who was miles away at the convent of St. Joseph in Ávila at the time, saw in prayer the same light she had seen before, rushing into his soul at the last possible moment. She later wrote to Father Gratian about this, noting that God's mercy pursues us even to the edge of death, waiting for that one instant of honesty. If you're finding this valuable, make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment letting us know where you are watching from. Now back to the story. Teresa also saw that the light did not come only to those who had committed small sins. She records a vision from 1576 during her travels to found the convent at Seville in southern Spain. The journey had been brutal. She traveled by mule cart over terrible roads, covering roughly 300 miles in the heat of August. The party included Teresa, several nuns, and Father Gratian. They reached Seville exhausted and sick. Teresa was 59 years old and in constant pain. She was praying late at night in a borrowed room near the Guadalquivir River when she was shown the soul of a man who had committed murder. She does not say how she knew this. She simply states that she was given to understand the gravity of his sins. He had killed in anger during a dispute over land boundaries somewhere in the countryside outside Seville, lied to cover it, bribed witnesses, and lived for years in moral darkness so thick that Teresa describes his soul as almost entirely black, with only a faint glimmer of light remaining at the very center where God still waited. Then, in the vision, the man was injured. He lay dying on a road. No priest nearby, no last rites, just him and his fading breath. And in those final seconds, he did what he had not done in decades. He turned his mind toward God and said, "Forgive me." Teresa writes that she saw the light come instantly. It tore through the blackness with such speed and force that she gasped out loud in her room. The soul was saved. Not because the murder was undone, not because the years of sin were erased, but because at the very end, he stopped lying to himself and spoke the truth. The vision troubled Teresa deeply, not because she doubted what she saw, but because it revealed something difficult about divine justice and mercy existing together. She writes in a letter to Father Gratian, dated August 23, 1576, preserved in the Carmelite archives in Rome. Rome, that she struggled to reconcile the severity of the man's sins with the immediacy of his salvation. She asked God in prayer why mercy could come so quickly to someone who had done so much harm. The answer she received, which she records in the same letter, was this: "I do not measure by the number of sins, but by the depth of the turn. One moment of true sorrow outweighs a lifetime of pretense." Teresa began teaching her nuns about this truth with an intensity that surprised even her closest companions. She held conferences at St. Joseph's every week, gathering the small community of 12 nuns around her in the chapter room to discuss prayer, virtue, and the spiritual life. Notes from these conferences, taken by Sister Maria de San Jose and Sister Ana de San Bartolome, survive in fragmentary form. One conference from November 1577 focused entirely on contrition. Teresa told her nuns that the most dangerous thing a soul could do was not to sin greatly, but to remain in mediocrity, speaking words of faith without internal transformation. She said that God prefers an honest sinner to a proud saint because the honest sinner can receive grace, while the proud saint has closed the door from the inside. She quoted the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, verses 9 through 14, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. The tax collector stood at a distance, would not even raise his eyes to heaven, and said only, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Jesus said that man went home justified. The Pharisee, who listed his virtues and thanked God he was not like other men, went home empty. Not because his prayers were longer, but because his heart was closed. Teresa told her nuns that she had seen this same pattern repeated countless times in her visions. Souls who thought themselves advanced in holiness remained in darkness because they could not admit their need. Souls who knew themselves to be wretched received light instantly because they spoke the truth. In 1578, Teresa founded a convent in Palencia in northern Spain, almost 200 miles from Ávila. The foundation was difficult. The local bishop was suspicious of her reforms. The building she secured was in poor condition, cold and damp. During the construction, a young woman came to her asking to join the Carmelite order. The woman was 23 years old from a wealthy family in Palencia. Well educated, she had a reputation in the town for piety. She attended daily mass at the Cathedral of Palencia, a Gothic structure famous for its intricate stonework. She fasted 3 times a week. She was known for her long prayers. But when Teresa interviewed her, something felt wrong. The woman spoke about her spiritual life with confidence, listing her practices and disciplines, but Teresa sensed no humility, no awareness of her own need for mercy. Teresa asked her a simple question: "When was the last time you told God you were sorry?" The woman hesitated. Then she said she did not often need to apologize because she lived carefully and avoided serious sin. Teresa thanked her politely and declined her application. Later, Teresa explained to her prioress, Mother Maria de San Jose, why she had refused the woman. She said that a soul who does not know its own poverty cannot receive the riches of grace. She said the woman's prayers were like coins stacked neatly on a table, impressive to look at, but weighing nothing in the economy of heaven. What heaven values, Teresa said, is the one cracked coin offered by trembling hands, the prayer that admits I have nothing and I need everything. That prayer, she said, is the only one that opens the floodgates. This teaching appears in a letter Teresa wrote to the discalcid Carmelite nuns in Seville, dated March 1578. The letter circulated among her convents and was copied multiple times. One copy survives in the library of the Carmelite monastery in Salamanca. Teresa also taught that contrition could be immediate, but its effects unfolded over time. She explained it using the image of a seed. The moment of sincere sorrow plants the seed. The light enters and life begins instantly, but growth takes time. The soul must cooperate with grace, avoid returning to old patterns, and allow the light to reach every corner of the interior castle. She compared it to a house that has been locked and dark for years. When the door finally opens and sunlight streams in, you see the dust, the cobwebs, the disorder that darkness had hidden. The light does not create the mess, it reveals it, and that revelation is the beginning of healing. In her final years, Teresa returned again and again to the vision she had seen in 1577. She wrote about it in letters to her confessors, to her nuns, and to lay people who sought her guidance. She told them all the same thing: do not wait to be perfect before you turn to God. Do not spend years preparing the perfect apology. Do not think that your sins are too great or your weakness too deep. The only thing that matters is that you mean it when you say it. One sincere word is enough. God does not need eloquence, he needs honesty. Father Geronimo Gratian recorded a conversation he had with Teresa just months before her death in October 1582. They were traveling together from Burgos to Ávila, a journey of roughly 150 miles through difficult terrain. Teresa was in great pain from an illness that would soon take her life. What doctors now believe was uterine cancer complicated by infection. The journey took 9 days. They stopped frequently so Teresa could rest. On the 6th day, somewhere between Valladolid and Medina del Campo, Gratian asked her what she wanted people to remember about her teachings. Teresa thought for a moment. Then she said, "Tell them that God is not far. Tell them that mercy is not complicated. Tell them that one honest moment changes everything." She died on October 4th, 1582, at the convent of Alba de Tormes. Her last recorded words were, "Lord, I am a daughter of the Church." But those who were present, including Sister Ana de San Bartolome, who had nursed her through the final illness, said that just before she lost consciousness, she whispered something else. "Gracias. Thank you." They believed she was thanking God for mercy, for the light she had seen, for the truth she had been allowed to witness and share. The vision Teresa saw has been studied by theologians for over 4 centuries. The Carmelite scholar Tomás Álvarez, writing in 1994 for the journal Ephemerides Carmeliticae, published in Rome, analyzed Teresa's descriptions and concluded that what she witnessed aligns perfectly with the Church's teaching on contrition and justification as defined by the Council of Trent, which met in multiple sessions from 1545 to 1563 in the northern Italian city of Trent. The council taught that justification begins with the grace of God moving the will, but requires the free response of the sinner, a response that includes faith, hope, charity, and contrition. Teresa's vision showed that response happening in real time. The soul turns, grace floods in. The transformation is instantaneous, even though the purification continues. But Teresa also saw something the theologians rarely emphasized. She saw the emotional component of God's response. In a passage from the interior castle that is often overlooked, found in the 6th dwelling place, chapter 1, she writes that when the soul turns toward God, with sincere sorrow, it is met not with coldness or formality, but with what she describes as immense tenderness. She says God does not wait to see if the soul will persevere or prove itself. He responds immediately, like a father who sees his child stumble and runs to catch them before they ask for help. The light she saw was not just illumination, it was love made visible. In 1580, 2 years before her death, Teresa wrote a short treatise called Conceptions of the Love of God, also known as Meditations on the Song of Songs. She composed it at the convent of Soria in north-central Spain during a brief respite from her constant travels. The work is unusual in her corpus because it focuses on mystical theology rather than practical advice. In it, she describes how God's mercy operates according to a logic that human beings find almost impossible to believe. She writes, "We think mercy must be earned, that we must crawl across miles of broken glass before God will listen. But God does not think as we think. His mercy is not a reward for good behavior. It is the gift that makes good behavior possible. It comes first. It comes freely. It comes the instant we stop pretending and speak the truth." She tells one final story that brings the entire teaching into sharp focus. A man came to her in Ávila in the late 1570s. The exact year is unclear, but it was after the founding of St. Joseph's and before Teresa's health collapsed entirely. He was in despair. He had lived a dissolute life for many years, had abandoned his wife and children, had wasted his inheritance on gambling and drinking, and now in his old age he was dying and terrified of judgment. He told Teresa he was certain he was damned because his sins were too many and his repentance came too late. Teresa listened to his confession of fear and failure. Then she asked him, "Do you wish you had lived differently?" He said yes. She asked, "Are you sorry?" He said yes. She asked, "Will you tell God that right now?" He hesitated. He said he did not know how to pray, that he had not prayed in decades, that he would surely say it wrong. Teresa leaned close and said, "You cannot say it wrong if you mean it. Just say, 'I'm sorry.'" The man closed his eyes. His lips moved. No one heard what he said except God. But when he opened his eyes again, Teresa saw the change. She later wrote to Father Gratian that she knew in that moment the man's soul had been touched by the same light she had seen in her vision. He died 3 days later, peacefully. The family, who had expected a hard death full of fear, found him calm and quiet, his face at rest. Teresa attended his funeral at the Church of San Juan in Ávila and told the mourners that they should not grieve as those without hope, because the mercy of God is faster than human sin and deeper than human failure. Teresa's writings on contrition were not published in full until after her death. Her complete works were edited by Fray Luis de Leon, a renowned poet and Augustinian theologian, and released in Salamanca in 1588, 6 years after she died. The Inquisition reviewed every page carefully, looking for errors or dangerous ideas. They found none. The vision of the light entering the soul was declared consistent with Catholic teaching and was included without alteration. Over the following centuries, The passage has been quoted by spiritual directors, retreat masters, and confessors as one of the clearest descriptions of what happens in the invisible world when a soul repents. In 1970, Pope Paul VI declared Teresa of Ávila a Doctor of the Church on September 27th, the first woman to receive that title. The declaration cited her teachings on prayer, mystical theology, and the interior castle. But it also mentioned her understanding of divine mercy, noting that her visions gave the Church a rare window into the mechanics of grace. The document stated that Teresa's gift was not only to see, but to explain, to translate the invisible into language that ordinary believers could understand and apply. Modern scholars have examined Teresa's writings using both theological and psychological frameworks. Dr. Rowan Williams, former Archbishop of Canterbury, wrote in 2006 in his book Teresa of Ávila, published by Continuum, that Teresa's descriptions of contrition show a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. She knew that most people struggle not with the desire to repent, but with the belief that repentance is possible for them. They think their sins are too great, their failures too permanent, their hearts too damaged. Teresa's vision destroys that lie. It shows that no soul is beyond the reach of grace, and that the door opens the instant we knock honestly. But Teresa also warned against presumption. In a letter dated June 15, 1579, addressed to Father Ambrosio Mariano de San Benito, she cautions against teaching that because God's mercy is so abundant, sin does not matter much. Teresa writes sharply, "Do not twist mercy into license. The light enters the soul that repents, not the soul that plans to repent someday. Contrition is not a future promise. It is a present act, and it requires facing the truth of what we have done without excuses. Mercy is infinite, but it is not magic. It requires our yes." Teresa's vision of the light has been painted, written about, and meditated on by countless Catholics since the 16th century. Artists from Bernini to modern painters have tried to capture the moment she describes, the sudden flood of radiance into a dark soul. None have succeeded fully because, as Teresa herself wrote, what she saw was both beyond images and too concrete to be dismissed as symbol. It was real light, it moved, it transformed, and it happened in an instant. In 1927, the discalced Carmelite scholar Silverio de Santa Teresa published a critical edition of Teresa's works in 9 volumes with Editorial de Espiritualidad in Burgos. The edition included previously unpublished fragments from her notebooks. One fragment, dated around 1578 based on paper and ink analysis, contains a single sentence that scholars believe summarizes her entire teaching on contrition. It reads, "One moment of naked truth is worth more than a lifetime of beautiful lies." The fragment was discovered in the archives of the Carmelite convent in Ávila, written in Teresa's own hand on a scrap of paper tucked inside her personal copy of the interior castle. It had been there for over 300 years. When it was finally published, it confirmed what readers had always sensed in Teresa's writings. She was not interested in theory. She was not interested in sentiment. She was interested in the hard, concrete reality of what happens when a soul stops running and faces God with nothing but the truth. That truth, Teresa insisted, is the only thing God requires. Not perfection, not elaborate penance, not years of preparation, just honesty, one sincere word. "I'm sorry," and the light comes. On the wall of the chapel at the convent of St. Joseph in Ávila, where Teresa lived and died, there is a small plaque installed in 1950 by the Discalced Carmelite Order. It marks the spot where Teresa is believed to have knelt when she saw the vision of the light entering the soul. The plaque is simple. It bears no decoration. It carries only a single line from the interior castle, chapter 29, verse 8. The mercy of God is not slow. It is we who are slow to ask. Every year, thousands of pilgrims visit that chapel. They kneel at the plaque. They pray. And many of them, for the first time in years, whisper the words Teresa saw change everything. "I'm sorry, Lord." They mean it. And according to what Teresa saw in 1577, at that exact moment, no matter how long they have been lost or how far they have wandered, the light enters. Fast as a spark, real as breath, flooding the soul with mercy that was always waiting, always ready, always one honest word away. In 2014, researchers at the Universidad Complutense de Madrid conducted a study on Teresa's mystical experiences using manuscript analysis and historical context. They published their findings in the journal Revista de Espiritualidad. The study concluded that Teresa's visions were not isolated experiences, but part of a consistent pattern that lasted throughout her adult life. The researchers noted that her descriptions remained remarkably consistent across decades of writing, suggesting genuine experience rather than literary invention. The vision of the light entering the contrite soul appears in multiple texts written years apart, always with the same core details. Sudden. Brilliant. complete. But the most striking finding came from comparing Teresa's accounts with those of other mystics from the same period. None of them saw exactly what Teresa saw. Other saints described consolations, locutions, visions of heaven or hell. Teresa saw the mechanism of grace itself, the invisible transaction that happens when mercy meets honesty. It was as though God had given her a specific mission to witness and report on the one thing most people never believe. That conversion can happen in an instant, that God does not count sins but measures hearts, that one word spoken in truth weighs more than 1,000 prayers spoken in pretense. The researchers also noted something else. Teresa's vision aligned perfectly with the lived experience of countless people throughout history who reported sudden conversions or moments of grace that changed everything. Paul on the road to Damascus, Augustine in the garden in Milan, Francis hearing the voice from the crucifix at San Damiano. These moments were not gradual, they were instantaneous, and they all began with the same movement Teresa saw in her vision, a soul stopping its flight and turning toward God with nothing left to hide. What Teresa gave the Church was not a new doctrine, but a visual confirmation of what the Church had always taught, that God is mercy, that he waits at the center of every soul, that he never abandons us, even when we abandon ourselves, and that the door back to him opens not with long preparation or perfect virtue, but with one simple, terrible, beautiful act, telling the truth. I'm sorry, I need you, I have nothing. The moment those words are spoken with real sincerity, the light comes. Teresa saw it, she recorded it, and 400 years later, her words still carry the weight of that vision, still offer the same hope to anyone brave enough to stop running and speak the truth into the silence.